A few years ago, my friend Tez and I set out on a great American road trip. We were going to drive from New York to Los Angeles, zigzagging through the country for 6 weeks. We were both in our early 20s, pretty broke, and as my mom had been a long-haul trucker, I suggested that we save a ton of money and we should sleep in the back of our hatchback. It was a pretty cozy setup. We bought some blankets and sheets at Goodwill and cut them up to make curtains. By the end of the first week, we had gotten this set up camp in about 10 minutes. We had our luggage moved to the front, curtains up, bedding laid down, and out for the night. We slept in parking lots, free camping sites, rest areas, and basically anywhere seemed safe and semi-legal. But there was never a night after the first night where we felt scared, until the last week on the trip in Arizona. We were near Flagstaff and I'd gotten pretty used to our routine. We didn't go out on a set schedule and never worked or drive more than 3 or 4 hours a day. No destination really in mind, outside of a few must-see landmarks. We drive to places we found at night before on Google and take suggestions from other campers, locals, and people we met. We'd also gotten very good at making friends. We went to Denny's with a group of rednecks and met a campsite. In the back of their pickup, because I got hungry and overheard them saying they were going to go, we met an 80-year-old cowboy who took us out to drinking and taught us to line dance at a country bar. We played the guitar with some musicians in the middle of a thunderstorm, got fed breakfast and dinner by tons of campers who invited us to hang out with them, and spent the 4th of July with a family who basically adopted us into their campsite. Basically, every encounter we had with a stranger was a positive one. This night didn't look to be any different. We found a free campsite in Google and drove up into the woods, following our GPS. We were pretty far out of town, and something seemed a little bit off when we pulled up to our campsite. There was one RV parked and 2 cars further up in the trees. We pulled up near the RV and a man opened the door. Taz waved hello, he just stared at her. His expression was completely blank. Then, as if he hadn't said anything, he just slowly closed the door again and staring at us through the window. I was figuring he just wanted some privacy and he thought we'd be obnoxious. We pulled farther down the road and found a flat spot to park the car. Instead of our usual routine of setting up camp immediately while there was still light out, we goofed around for a little bit, smoking and laughing and taking dumb photos of ourselves. Tess pointed out that a campfire farther down the campsite and we decided to go be friendly. We'd met so many cool people in the previous 5 weeks by just going up and offering beer or just chatting, so we wandered over. Near the campfire were 2 men, the owners of the cars we'd seen earlier. They seemed friendly and we sat down and chatted with them. They were drinking and smoking, so we sat down and had a beer with them. One of the men seemed pretty off, and we came to find out that 2 of them didn't actually know one another. The older man was definitely on some sort of drugs. He was spinning in circles and talking about UFOs, and however, they seemed harmless. This left us chatting with the younger man who claimed to be a former park ranger. He was handsome and easygoing, and we spent several hours just chatting about our trip, families, and everything. Then he started talking about the bear. He'd seen a bear earlier in the forest. Tez didn't believe him and he pulled out his camera to show her some photos of the bear. It was very close to the campsite and we both were a little freaked out. It wasn't unheard of for one of us to get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, so the idea of a bear hanging around in the night spooked us. The ranger just laughed, and then his expression changed completely. It's hard to describe, but his voice seemed somehow cold. He said, "If you get out of your car in the middle of the night, it's not a bear you should be worried about." I kept waiting for the laugh and for him to nudge Ted's with his elbow. Jokes on the foreigner and they say the city girl, right? He never did. I laughed awkwardly and made a dumb joke about serial killers in the woods. My friend laughed as well and joked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We moved to another subject. Within 5 minutes, the ranger had come back to it and was talking about something grabbing us from our car in the middle of the night. No matter how we tried to steer the conversation away from serial killers, he kept latching back on. The older man was high as a kite at this point and was staring at the stars, not talking. We'd just awkwardly laugh and sip our beer and try to get the conversation going somewhere else. Then, the ranger stood up and walked towards the cooler to get another beer. At this point it was pitch black out and I can't see anything outside the circle of light from the campfire. The beer cooler was outside the circle. Suddenly there's a red dark in the darkness. and it took a moment for me to realize that it's a camera. The ranger's holding a camera. He had taken a photo of us. I could see the screen on the digital camera light up. Now, it wasn't very odd for people that we met to take pictures with us. My friend has this gorgeous dark hair, blue eyes, with like a young Megan fox, and we were pretty friendly. People like having pictures of themselves, too. It was an extremely strange thing to have this person taking pictures of us without asking or even indicating that that's what he was doing. We were both staring at him like deer in headlights at this point, but instead of realizing what he was doing is a bit weird, he checks his camera, adjusts some things, and takes another photo. This time with the flash, not asking us to smile or proposing a group photo, and no explanation. After this photo, he comes back and sits down by the fire. Not a word said about the photo. At this point, me and Tez are mutually freaked out. We make some BS excuse that we need to go set up our campsite and nope the hell out. When we stand to leave, the UFO guy smiles and says, "Have a good night." Ranger, however, looks at us and smiles and doesn't reach to anything, and she just says, "Be careful out there. There's more than bears in the woods." Every hair on the body stood on end. I wasn't alone in my discomfort either, because Tez laughed a response out and pulled me away from the campfire towards our car. We rushed back to the car, which we only found in the dark by referencing the RV, and jump in the front seats. My friend Tez is all about hyperventilating. Why did he take pictures of us? I was shaking. I responded, "I read that serial killers sometimes warn their victims." She stared at me for a second and locked the car doors. "Do you think he just took victim photos of us?" We both freak out. She's in full panic mode, turns on the headlights of the car, and I immediately yell her to turn them off because now he knows exactly where our car is. God knows why, but that's the only night not to set up our camp. We didn't need to tear anything down, so we just got out of there as soon as light came. As we got into the dirt road, the ranger was walking towards our car and with that same cold expression. So I hope I never meet that ranger again. Over a decade ago, my best friend told my sister and I a story. We were all in college and she was living at her parents' for a while. They live not too far outside the city, but it's a hilly farmland, so most of the houses are pretty far apart. A family friend lived in a house across the field from them. This is what she told us. Her friend cut across the field the other night to come over. It was a clear night and a bright moon. All of a sudden, a huge shadow flew overhead, completely covering the light from the moon, so he claimed. The shadow flew straight to my best friend's house. Shaken, he continued on, and once at the house, told my friend and her family what he had seen. That night, or a couple of nights later, my best friend saw a dark, three-dimensional blob hanging from her ceiling. It was darker than any shadow in the room. It hung down like a half circle or a raindrop. She saw it every night. When a light was on, there was nothing. She spent days moving things around in her room and outside her room. But that shadowy blob remained there. It didn't scare her, but she felt it was watching her. She was just started sleeping with her bedside lamp on to try to help her feel better. My sister and I thought it was a weird story, but, whatever. About 2 years later, I had completely forgotten about my friend's story. I was home alone from college for summer and had to stay in my brother's old room. Things were fine for a week or two, but one night, as I was falling asleep, I saw a three-dimensional blob sticking out from the seam where the wall meets the ceiling. It was darker than any other shadow in the room, and I had the strangest sensation that it was looking at me. I was very irked, but not afraid. I moved things around inside the room and out over the next few days, but always it was in the same place. I started sleeping with the bedside light on. Then I would turn it off for a while to let my eyes adjust to each night to see if it was still there, and it was. Then after about 2 to 3 weeks, when I saw it, I found it had moved up toward me, still along the seam, about 3 feet. After that, I just kept the sort of light on. I was in and out of my room for several years, and I had never had a light off. I finished school and moved here and there, and any time I ever had to stay in that room, there's some kind of light on. I did check again though, and every now and then, over the past 5 odd years, I hadn't seen it since. I never saw it in any other room or place that I lived. Final notes. The shadow the friend certainly saw could have been an owl, but he wasn't sure. But who really knows? My friend and I gave a cute name after I remembered her story, and I told her I saw the same thing. Again, we got the impression that it was just curious and looking at us, but not up to anything sinister. I'm not a believer in shadow people or creatures, but honestly, I don't know how else to describe this blob. Three years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to hike up near her parents' place in Oregon. When we went to visit them for a week, we decided to bring camping gear and stay the night. I had only been camping once before, and it was in Boy Scouts, so it had been a long time. My girlfriend grew up camping and knows her way around the area very well. So, myself, her, and her parents' dog, Bear, a huge Newfoundland lab mix, headed up the trail. We saw a few people out, but they were mostly just day hikers. People loved Bear and stopped to pet him. So a little after 6 we made camp, set up our tent, and pull out our grub. We had decided to buy big sub sandwiches, stuff for s'mores, chips, and a few tall boys of beer. I fired up a joint and she poured out her guitar after we finished eating. Great relaxing night, and we started winding down, getting ready to head to bed. She was in the tent getting dressed for bed, while I was finishing the joint and making sure the fire was out. Suddenly, Bear growls a slow, menacing growl I've never heard him do before. I pet him and look around, figuring it's an animal or something. We get to sleep at around 1. I wake up and my girlfriend is shaking. She looks terrified. I hear Bear growling beside us, and she holds her finger up, talking low. She tells me she woke up to voices. I listen and I hear what sounds like 2 men talking. Then we hear something absolutely terrifying. One of them says to his friend, "I'll take the girl, you get rid of the guy." I knew we were screwed. We had no weapons of any sort. My girlfriend unzips the tent and Bear rockets out. I've never seen him move that fast in my life. I hear one of the guys yell, "Oh shit," and I hear Bear snarling and growling, and I hear them running. My girlfriend takes the satellite phone in. Her dad insisted that we carry it, and thank God, calls her dad. He calls law enforcement, and they sent people out to there. They told us to stay in the tent. Bear comes back out of breath with no sign of the guys, and we wait for the ranger. When they show up, they find no sign of the guys, save for truck tires and some cigarette butts. They gave us a ride back down to our car later that day. Bear got a steak and plenty of love. For a while now, my husband and I have collected several vintage and antique items. But for the past 6 years, I've been collecting vintage and antique dolls. I don't find dolls creepy like most people do. I find them to be pretty things children can play with and find company when they feel alone. Since most of the dolls I buy are old, I don't know the names the original owners gave them. So most of the time I just give them names that I can't get out of my head when I think of the doll. This one doll I got from a doll shop a while back has been one of my favorites. A beautiful composition doll for the late 1930s. She has very childlike features to her. When I got her, I couldn't come up with a name for the longest time. Then, one day, the name Emily popped into my head. I don't tell people what I name the dolls I buy because I believe each person should name the doll something special to them. Now, my husband and I would babysit the 3-year-old from time to time downstairs. When his mom had to work late or overnight because she worked at a hotel, he would play with some of the dolls or toys we had to keep him entertained. When he would ask me what I did name the dolls, I would always answer, "You call them whatever you want, and they will answer." And he always said okay. One day, he wanted to play with this new doll I got, which is Emily. He asked me what he always asked me, and I gave him the usual answer, and that was that. The following day, his mom asked me if I can go with them because she had doctor's appointments and wanted company. I said yes, of course, because I saw more as a friend than a neighbor. My husband had the day off, of course, and he came with me. He said he wanted to take the little one to the toy store. So we all went together. While waiting for my friend, her son was reading the children's book that were there. One of the book was a beach book. All of a sudden, this little one was telling us while pointing to the book, "Look, that's Emily." I asked, "Who's Emily?" He said, "The little doll that you let me play with yesterday." I asked who told her the name. He said, "Oh, she did, and she said she's very happy to be living there." I gave a look of shock to my husband. We didn't talk about it until we got home. We decided to keep the doll in a case just in case the little girl's soul was trapped in the doll. But we have noticed that all the dolls in the same room do get moved the same way all the time, except for Emily. I was in the woods camping with my friends, and we were screwing around. Just a normal teenage activity. By the time everyone was starting to bunk down, we heard some screaming across the park. We dismissed it as a pack of coyotes howling at the moon. As it turned out, what we heard wasn't coyotes, but actually something much worse. Later that night, I woke up to the sound of sticks snapping. I thought it was my friend putting more wood into the fire, which didn't make sense because we were trying to sleep, and we didn't need the fire at that moment. I whispered to my friend, and he was in a tent. We decided it was just a critter and rolled back over to sleep. Then something started scratching at my tent. I was still half asleep when my friend called me, AJ, and I realized it wasn't my friend, but there was this huge shadow of this thing outside my tent. By my estimation, it was easily 7 feet tall. It was trying to get in my tent, and when I realized what it was doing, I grabbed my hunting knife. I take it with me on camping trips and yelled at it to get the fuck away from me. I realized I knew it was coming for me, and it started to scratch at the tent more. At which point, I screamed louder than I have ever screamed in my entire life. I think I finally scared it off with that. We decided to pack up and head the hell home. When we got to the exit of the park, I felt so relieved, and when I got home, I did some research and found out what was most likely attacking us was probably a skinwalker or wendigo. I had heard of them before, but never encountered one. Thankfully, me and my friend survived. First off, I never believed in ghosts until I came into contact with one. My name is Dan, and I am 16. Ever since I can remember, I've always loved American history, and I've been fascinated by the wars America has participated in. The war that I am most into is the Civil War. I am a firm believer after the experience that I had at one of the most haunted places on the planet. That place is Gettysburg. This story takes place in spring of 2017. For spring break, my mother and I decided to take a trip to Gettysburg with my grandparents since my grandfather was the one who initially got me into the Civil War. My family has been going to Gettysburg as early as the 1970s, and I myself have been there 8 times. We have toured the battlefield during the day, and I wanted to tour the battlefield again since I was leaving the next day. My mom agreed to take me out again that evening. While my mom and I were out in an area called Little Round Top, there were some of the most ferocious fighting in a 3-day engagement that took place. I was driving our car behind the wheel. This particular battlefield was pitch black, not a single street lamp for miles, and my mom and I were the only ones there. While I was driving, I was starting to get a feeling of dread and was becoming anxious. I could only see what was in the darkness ahead of my headlights. The darkness engulfed us as if we were driving into a black hole. All that we could hear was silence. As I came up to a crossroads, I got a sense of fear and looked to my left. As I looked out, I am sure the color of my face drained out, and I had a look of stark terror. Outside to my left, about 50 feet out, was the gray, semi-transparent torso of a Confederate soldier. He wore the typical kepi-style hat with a gray outfit that was typical for the time of battle. I was unable to see his face or his legs because the apparition only appeared from the waist up. He was stopped in the middle of the road, just walking toward us. The time I spent staring at this figure felt like hours, but had only been a few seconds. As soon as I came to, I turned the car right and sped out of there. Thanks for reading my story. If any of you have ever experienced anything like this around Gettysburg, please, I'd love to hear your story. Let me start out by saying, I did not believe in ghosts, demons, or anything of that sort until I lost my papa to dementia. The last stages of his dementia were hard to go through for me and my mother. He was forgetting how to do everything and even forgot about who we were. Me and my mother stayed up so much trying to take care of him day in and day out that we were very much often sleep deprived. One day in particular, I was going to eat Chinese food with some family. And mind you, I was definitely sleep deprived that day. I looked up into the clouds. I was always taught to look up into them and you'll see nice things. That was, however, not the case of this. I had a bone-chilling experience that sent chills down my spine. What I saw, I wouldn't ever wish this on anybody else. It was a silhouette of something with a tail and horns in a white cloud. It scared me so much that it made me sick. I saw this a week prior to my papa's passing, which made me feel even worse about the situation. I refuse to leave my papa's side. I wouldn't let him see me cry though. When it came time for his passing, a day or so before, he said he saw a light or a knight and looked directly behind me at our door. I watched him pass away, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I watched his spirit go, and the message he left me was I'm sorry, and then he was gone. After he passed, my mother noticed something strange. We are a Christian family, and had been taught to be absent from the body meant to be present with the Lord. My mom saw my papa's dark silhouette, or what appeared to look like him, in my sister's picture frame. I didn't believe her at first, and thought it was just the grieving process until I saw for myself. I thought I was going crazy and had myself checked for schizophrenia. I'm definitely not a schizophrenic. My mom asked our doctor about this situation, and he said it could be an illusion. But there's nothing in the way of the picture frame, nothing reflecting. We used all the logic in the world we could find, and you can still see it when it's dark. Recently, we invited our elderly neighbors over to check it out. They are best friends of my papa and mama. They saw it as well. I invited my aunt and cousin to see, and my sister and a few of my friends, and they all see the same thing. One of them freaked out and said I gotta get up out of here. We thought he was looking after my sister because she was going through a lot. It's still a mystery what's there, and doesn't hurt anyone, or at least it hasn't yet. It does give me a super spooky vibe though. This one comes from another driver of the same company I work for. A little background on Paul. I feel is important to this story. Paul is a 6'4", 235-pound muscular guy who is 100% health nut. He doesn't drink or use any type of tobacco products. He also very rarely is scared by anything. Also worth noting, all of our trucks have inboard cameras facing the driver in road in case of an accident. There is evidence of what happened. They only come on if the truck experiences a hard impact or the driver slammed on the brakes, but only records for 13 seconds. Now, on with the story. When a truck has any sort of problem that the company believes its mechanics can fix, and if it's near an S terminal, they will generally have their driver bring the truck to be looked at. One day while in our Alabama terminal, Paul noticed his truck was idling funny, so he decided to have it looked at before leaving. The mechanic looked at it, found the problem, and said he would have to swap it into a different truck for the time being, as the repair would take a few days, which Paul did not have. He assigned him a truck and said, "It's been freshly processed. The previous driver suffered a heart attack and died in the sleeper." Paul just shrugs it off and puts his bags in it, back under the load, and leaves. The first few days went about as normal as they could go. The fourth day, however, Paul said he began to notice a very odd smell, like maybe cigar and scent was burning. He booed off, thinking maybe the previous owner smoked or burned some candles or something when he parked. The smell goes away and Paul continues on his way. When he finally stops that evening, he goes inside the truck stop to grab some food. Paul always brought his Yorkie, Sylvester, with him, so when he stopped he could crack the window of the truck and allow fresh air for his dog. As he was walking back to his truck, he notices smoke is coming from the cracked windows. He rushes to his truck, fearing Sylvester may have chewed on a wire and caused something on fire. But when he opens the door, the truck has no smoke in it, only the smell he had experienced earlier in the day. Putting it off as him being tired and seeing things, Paul climbs in with Sylvester, gives him his usual Slim Jim and Smart water snack and drink, and begins to eat his own dinner. After eating, he closes the curtains that wrap around the cab, blocking out anyone from outside being able to see in. He proceeds to lay down and watch a movie on his tablet. After a while, he begins nodding off, and he hears the curtains move. Popping his eyes open, Paul noticed the driver's side curtain is slightly open. Thinking wind is coming from the cracked windows, he closes it, rolls the windows up, and goes to lay back down. He finally falls asleep and wakes up at 2 a.m. to the smell again, but this time, smoke is visible through the lights that crept through the small cracks of the curtains. Paul jumps up and looks around, but there aren't any visible signs of a fire or anything that could produce smoke. Thinking he was hallucinating, Paul lays back down to go back to sleep when he hears a very raspy male voice whisper, "Help me." Now Paul is beginning to become concerned and realizing it may not be a hallucination he's experiencing. But remaining optimistic, he puts it off as he's still being an hallucination and rows off over to go back to sleep. Paul wakes up to a sudden jerk of the truck rolling over. He sees the camera light indicating it's recording. It still smells like the strange smell, and he sees the smoky haze. Thinking he has been hit by another driver backing into the spot next to him, he pulls the curtain, but he sees nothing. The parking lot is dead. Suddenly, the phone begins ringing. It's the overnight safety manager, Kate, calling. Paul is thinking that they are calling to see what happened. He answers by saying, "Hey Kate, everything is okay." Kate frantically shouts at him to get out of the truck now. "Don't think about it, just get out of the truck." He grabs Sylvester, climbs out of the truck, while yelling, "Kate, what's going on?" He asks her, confused and still half asleep, "Paul, there's a man in your truck, you didn't see him?" He assured her he is the only person in the truck, and even goes back inside to show her nothing is there. Kate says, "Give me 1 second and I'll FaceTime you and show you." He accepts the FaceTime and sees the computer screen with the video feed from his truck. Kate starts the video and immediately notices a large, transparent man sitting in the passenger seat staring at him as he sleeps. Extremely unnerved by this, Paul immediately jumps out of the truck yelling. Kate asks if he can see any more of our company trucks in the lot, as it's near a terminal and generally has more than 2 of our own trucks there. But Paul was too shaken up to be able to notice anything. Knowing he would only be able to drive again within the hour, he asked Kate to send a request for him to go home into another truck. Once he found her, she was very pale and noticeably distraught. Paul asked her what was wrong and she showed him a picture of the last driver. He was an identical match to the man watching him sleep, and frequently smoked brandy-flavored Black and Mild cigars. Paul immediately transferred to a new truck, making sure its last driver was still living. I'm a female. It was Thursday and I had an alarm for 6 a.m. because I had school. I woke up to my alarm blasting in my ear. I grabbed my phone and turned the alarm off. I was awake now and was glued to my bed, so I decided to go on Instagram. That's when I saw it. Someone standing 1 foot away from me. My vision was a bit blurry, but I could see what she was wearing. She had long hair and a nightgown with flowers. Her legs were so pale. She was in front of my brother's bed, moving side to side gently while looking at me. I was paralyzed, couldn't move. I went under my covers and started rubbing my eyes when I accidentally scratched myself. That's when I realized I wasn't dreaming. I pulled my covers off and she was still there. All I could do was call for my brother's name. For my brother's privacy, we'll just call him Jack. I whispered while crying, "Jack, use your flashlight." I said this about 5 times while crying louder. He heard me on the 6th time and he woke up and grabbed his flashlight. That's when she vanished and my dog woke up. I was still scared and crying. I told my brother what happened and I still went to school. When I came back, I told my mom, and what she said still gives me chills. She said a woman had died in her house. She used to live with her son. When she died, her son moved away and my mom rented the house. I'm no longer comfortable being in this house alone. I was always a skeptic when it came to UFOs. I never really believed in them as much as I did with the usual cryptids like Bigfoot, werewolves, and other beasts. With UFOs, I always thought they were helicopters or CGI or maybe even Chinese lanterns or something along those lines. But that all changed one night. On April 26, 2014, my mom and I were coming home from Altoona after eating out, and it was about almost 9 o'clock at night. Now, if you're familiar with the roads in Pennsylvania, you'll know that there's a lot of curvy roads and hills. We were coming down a hill just on the outskirts of Cassandra. At the bottom of the hill is an old gas station that went out of business years ago, and to the right is a tavern. I was watching the road in case any deer jumped out in front of us. My mom suddenly said, "What's that?" And I looked to the right to see a bright light in the sky, motionless by a street light near the telephone wires above the tavern. My mom slowed down, and we both stared at it to see if it did anything. Sure enough, it did. It moved into 2 smaller lights and dimmed a bit. Then, the strange lights changed to 4 in a line into a straight line before expanding into the shape of a triangle. A few more lights appeared, and some changed colors to blue or red. The color lights flashed a little, and the strange thing was, they were at an impressive size. I was absolutely mesmerized, and didn't even think about taking out my phone to record it. While we stared at the UFO, we went through a tunnel. When we emerged out of the tunnel, the thing was gone. My mom and I couldn't believe what we saw. Please keep in mind that I've known and lived in this area for 17 years. I've never seen anything like that in our area before. It's a small town and we don't have any cryptids around. At least I don't think so. I don't really talk about it much because people would think I'm crazy. I've tried talking about it once at a school, but they still didn't believe me. They said it was probably a helicopter, but it couldn't have been. The object was silent and didn't make any kind of noise. I never spoke of it after that, though, and didn't let it get to me. It did bother me for a little bit that my classmates didn't believe me, but eventually I got over it because they never believed anything I said anyway. Every time we drove past that same exact spot, I always watched the sky to see if it'll ever return. I am definitely not a skeptic of UFOs anymore after that incident. They're definitely out there. And I just wish I knew what they were doing